Hi, this is Jenny Bair of Living Well Dallas, and today I'm here with my friend Sarah Ferguson.
Hello.
Who is a mom, a counselor, a musician, a songwriter, and a life comedian, and many more other things. And she also is a preacher's kid. And so today we wanted to have a little section on what it was like growing up as a PK. Isn't that what you call it?
Yeah, PK is the
term,
lingo.
The lingo.
Yes.
So tell us what it was like growing up in the environment of the church, because you really haven't not had an environment of growing up in the church, correct?
Right. So it was, it was interesting once I got to a point where I decided I could sort of think through about that my parents had actually chosen the ministry and that I was born into it. That was sort of an aha moment for me, because it put a layer on my faith of owning it myself, where I think most people are brought to church by their parents, and at some point you have to do that, self-discovery and faith owning. It was different for me because it was my dad's job, and it was like going to work with my dad, and my friends wouldn't really understand what it was like to be a pastor's kid, and I would say, well, just think if your dad had the biggest meeting of his life every week and you had to be there for it, and then you got to hear his bosses respond, how people responded to how that meeting went. That's what it was like. And I think too, another thing is, I was sort of around and sort of growing up during the Clinton years, and I remember when Chelsea Clinton was being just hammered by the media about like her hair and the way she looked and being misquoted and all that kind of stuff, and I remember like looking at her and feeling sort of a sense of empathy and sympathy and understanding that it wasn't the entire nation looking at our family, but it was definitely like living under a microscope, because we lived in a small town and there were just certain things that were expected of me and assumed about me without me ever being able to kind of prove myself.
So what were some of the assumptions that you think other people had about you that were probably, well, what were some of the true ones and what were some of the not true ones?
Well, I think, one of the biggest ones was that our family was fine. That our family was, like, how could you have any problems because, your dad has chosen this, noble thing to do with his life, and you guys always seem okay, so how could you ever have any problems because you're the pastor's kid and you're the pastor's family. So that was I think that was probably one of the hardest ones, because it's sort of, there was just like a level of misunderstanding there between myself and everybody else. And at the same time, there was that, but then there was also the expectation. So if I did anything wrong, if I, stepped out of line or even made, a joke, or I don't know, said I listened to a certain type of music, there was I can't
You
believe.
do that?
Yeah, how could you do that? Or, what, you're a pastor's kid, you're not supposed to behave that way or act that way or think that way, or, whatever it was. So
Fit into a certain...
Right. Everybody had a preconceived notion of who I was, or who I should be.
So how did you find the real Sarah in all of that? With, with feeling sort of like you're under a microscope and you're in a fishbowl.
Right.
Scrutinized. Well, a good Christian girl doesn't do that, or
right.
or behave that way. How did you come to owning Sarah yourself?
Well, I think one of the positive things that came out of it is, especially in the church, I developed a lack of tolerance for insincerity and fakeness. And I think because I saw both sides of that, being humans, my parents did the best that they could, but, that the inconsistency of, quote unquote, a good Christian or a pastor or whatever, that was to be, and just, their day-to-day life. There was an inconsistency there, and, other people too, or even people putting on me the expectation of, this is how you're supposed to be, and just realizing, but that's not how I feel, and I'm not even sure if I'm supposed to feel that way. So kind of finding myself in that was kind of continually bucking the idea of this preconceived notion of who I was. And so I think for a long time I just sort of hid and was very quiet and very shy about who I was. But there was this constant kind of nagging of, of who I was. And I think I was able to see that, those inconsistencies in other people, and have compassion for them. And I think that's really what, really what kind of set me in my faith was, realizing that there are lots of people hurting, and a lot of people try to act like they're not hurting. Right. And that's kind of how I found, I think, more of my place. But it's been a layer process, like anything. And, going off to college was definitely part of that. And just, and I went way far away, so I was, gone and not able to come home when things got rough on the weekend, or, or whatever it was. I really was kind of on my own.
So, now did your faith growing up as a pastor's kid in that sort of environment, as a church kid, shall we say, did that have any, link to the school that you chose, or, at the university level, or the profession that you chose?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, it's interesting because I think that there's like these notions of pastors' kids, like they're either the worst kids in the world, or they're
goody two-shoes.
Right, or they're the goody two-shoes. And I sort of felt like I was like, well, I'm going to make my own brand. I'm going to be a combination of both. And while there was like a lot of hurt and sort of kind of spiritual stuff that was probably negative that happened because of that, there was always this strong abiding faith. And I think that was established primarily from my grandparents' consistent prayer for me. Every morning they sit together, and they still do it to this day, and they eat their breakfast and drink their coffee, and they pray. They pray through our family. They pray for, and I've seen that my entire life. And they still do it. We'll go at Thanksgiving, and they will be the first ones up, and they will be sitting and praying for us by name. And I think that faithful prayer, their faithful prayers, probably kept me out of a lot of trouble, but also established, again, a deep abiding faith of that I longed for, that I wanted. And so there was true faith being lived out in me. And I think, the college that I chose, was weird enough that, it wasn't it wasn't a state school, and it wasn't the school that my mom and dad went to, but it was a small Christian school. And I wanted to have those values because those were so grounding to me.
So, I'm always interested when I think about different cultures or subsets of our culture, and I think Christian is one of them.
Right.
And so I always like to ask this question, what do you like to hear most? Maybe I should start with the negative. What do you like to hear least about your culture as a Christian? And what do you like to hear most, or what do you believe to be true about being a Christian?
The thing I think I least like about it is probably that it is one thing, that it is definable. It is definable because I believe in the Bible, and I believe that's where our truth comes from. But the culture aspect of it is so wide and just full of differences. And so I think when people hear that you're Baptist, they immediately think you're the extreme of that. And I think it's just the thought that it's extreme, and that it immediately goes to a stereotype and a negative. And the thing I like the most about my culture, is the sense of community, true sense of community. And I found it, one-on-one, and I found it in small groups, but just that sense of community, because I really feel like it's completely impossible to do this life on your own.
I don't know that we're wired to do it on our own.
I don't think we weren't created in that way. We were created in community, so, yeah.
All right, well, you know what? We're going to come back and we're going to talk about prayer in just a moment, so don't miss the second segment with Sarah Ferguson and myself, Jenny Bair, on Health Chat.